systems approach to process improvement project model for NERC Electric Reliability Compliance Program by Bernard Johnson in IE 561. In 2007, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission approved 83 proposed reliability standards that were developed by the North American Reliability Corporation, or better known as NERC. NERC is a certified electric reliability organization responsible for developing and enforcing FERC-approved reliability standards. These standards were a result of the 2003 blackout of Northeast United States and some parts of Canada, later found to be the result of poor vegetation management on transmission line right-of-ways, out-of-date planning system models, poorly communicated facility ratings and their limits, and poor relay maintenance and testing programs. The NERC Electric Reliability Standards apply to registered entities who are all users, owners, and operators of the bulk power system within the United States. It's all based on their particular registration category. For example, some are transmission operators, some are transmission owners, some are generation owners, some are generation operators, purchase selling entities, load serving entities, distribution providers, transmission planners, reliability coordinators, and balancing authorities. The registered entities, NERC compliance departments, struggle with meeting the requirements of the FERC-approved reliability standards. So step one, we need to identify stakeholders and rank them. All of the following stakeholders have a stake in minimizing system outages on the electric system. There are the regulators such as FERC, NERC, and CERC. CERC is the Southeast Reliability Corporation, and all the other regional reliability organizations across the United States. You have executives and upper management within the company. You have owners of the company, stakeholders or stockholders, as well as customers. In the case of Oglethorpe Power Corporation, it's the Georgia EMCs. You have system neighbors, such as the Georgia Integrated Transmission System. That's Georgia Power, MEAG, the Municipal Electric Authority of Georgia, and Dalton Utilities. You have suppliers. In this case, for the NERC reliability standards, suppliers referred to here are plant operations personnel because they supply the compliance evidence that the standards require. And then there are other partners, such as the family of companies. OPC is a generator owner-operator, purchase selling entity. The family of companies also include Georgia Transmission Corporation, who is a transmission planner, transmission owner, and also Georgia System Operations Corporation, who is a transmission operator. And you also have the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association and ACES members, which is a collaborative of other utility companies who ACES is the representative to buy and sell power on the open market for them. Step two, identify and prioritize stakeholder needs and wants. Our top two stakeholders are the regulators, who are our customer, and plant operations personnel, who is our supplier. Now the regulators, they need us to comply with the standards that have been approved by FERC. Only planned system outages are acceptable, and any unplanned system outages that are due to acts of God are tolerated, but only if and when mitigating actions have occurred prior to the unplanned outage, such as vegetation management must be done, relay coordination between neighboring utilities is a must, the system models must be updated accordingly. Now, plant operations personnel, the supplier, they must efficiently operate and maintain plant facilities, avoid unplanned generator outages, and maximize generator availability. Step three, develop operational definitions for stakeholder quality characteristics of customers. Now, it's important that we recognize the regulators, our customer, and how they support, facilitate, develop, and enforce the electric reliability standards. They require that all registered entities in the United States comply with the FERC-mandated electric reliability standards. FERC issues an order to NERC to develop a standard to address a specific issue. NERC organizes and facilitates the standard development team to develop an initial draft of the reliability standard. After that standard has been approved by FERC, a mandatory enforcement date is given to the standard. NERC, CERC, and other regional reliability organizations set the criteria for registered entities to test their facilities to decide whether or not they are in compliance with the mandatory standards. Both the regulator and the industry come together to agree on a standard that is technically sound that supports electric reliability. Bottom line, it is not based on cost or money. It is simply based on electric reliability. Will this keep the lights on? Now, plant operations personnel, the supplier, they are required to operate and maintain OPC generating facilities efficiently. Any activities that are not directly related to fuel, thermodynamics, mechanical limitations, or electrical output are seen as an obstacle or distraction to day-to-day operations. It is important that the electrical liability standards are developed and interpreted properly for operations personnel to have a clear understanding of what operations evidence satisfies the requirements of the electrical liability standards. Now, OPC's NERC compliance department must clearly communicate the requirements of the electrical liability standards so that plant operations personnel are not bogged down with regulatory legalese, minutia, and plant operations personnel can focus then on the operational actions needed to generate the evidence required by the regulators without trying to interpret the reliability standards. Step 4. Translate stakeholder quality characteristics into producible quality characteristics. Now, OPC's NERC compliance department has written that it must meet customer expectations. It's important that the PGPs list, that is the procedural policies, guidelines, and procedures, list the evidence needed to show compliance with the NERC requirements. The PGP should be reviewed periodically to ensure that the evidence generated by OPC satisfies the NERC requirements. As the PGPs are reviewed, specific PGPs are identified for improvement. The two areas that have the most improvement potential are processes that lack procedural details to provide the steps necessary for plant operations personnel to follow that provide evidence of compliance. And also processes lack direction in listing the formal evidence repository for plant operations personnel to store evidence where the NERC compliance department and plant operations both have access to the stored evidence. Step 5. Develop operational definitions for producible quality characteristics. Plant operators are the main suppliers of compliance evidence. Therefore, they should also participate in developing the evidence list that would meet NERC requirements. Plant operators are the key to building internal customer-supplier relationships with OPC headquarters by, number 1, defining the compliance evidence needed to comply with the NERC requirements, and number 2, describing the processes necessary to generate and store the compliance evidence. It's not realistic to depend on company headquarters to dictate to plant operations how they should handle their processes, especially if personnel at headquarters are not familiar with the plant environment. So it's important that people in the environment define the necessary evidence to be produced as it applies to the NERC standard requirements. Step 6. Identify processes within which quality characteristics are produced. Here we have an example of an OPC operating procedure here for voltage regulation and automatic voltage control. Now, OPC NERC compliance processes fall into one of two categories: operations processes and planning processes. Operations processes involve relay maintenance and testing, voltage regulation control, relay misoperations, investigation, and reporting, and event reporting. Now, these processes are performed frequently, if not daily. Now, planning processes, they involve annual verifications for generator capability, electrical limitations, protective system training, and voice data communication links. Now, these processes are performed annually at a minimum. Step 7, develop knowledge of the processes. An investigation team comprised of engineers, lawyers, and technicians from the United States and Canada found that the blackout, which caused a long-duration outage in the northeast United States and parts of Canada, was caused by poor vegetation management, out-of-date system models, poorly communicated facility ratings, poor relay maintenance and testing programs. The NERC standards laid out the requirements necessary to avoid encroachment by vegetation growth on transmission line right-of-ways, to keep planning system models up to date, to keep an updated record of system limits, and to properly maintain and test protective system relays. Step 8, achieve stability and capability and output quality characteristics. Now, OPC owns a number of energy facilities across the state of Georgia, and each energy facility has operations and maintenance personnel responsible for daily operating needs of their respective plant. Without procedural details needed, plant personnel are not able to complete their operating duties to provide the necessary evidence for plant personnel to generate compliance evidence with consistent quality across the generating fleet. Where one or two plants are able to successfully follow the procedures that result in sufficient evidence for compliance, other generating plants may have results that are not sufficient evidence for compliance. Now, this is not due to an actual violation of non-compliance, but because the other plants lack the detail needed that relate back to the regulatory requirement. The second problem deals with plant personnel failing to properly store compliance evidence in the electronic database system. Relay maintenance, testing, and investigation reports are all done manually by hand. The hard copies of completed reports are then scanned, or should be scanned electronically and stored on the electronic database system. This is also not consistently done between plants. And in order to achieve stability and capability in evidence output, Current processes need to address the level of detail needed in compliance evidence, as well as provide the steps needed to consistently scan and store compliance evidence. Step 9, translate output quality characteristics into process quality characteristics. In order for us to develop process quality characteristics, we must first make fundamental changes to the system that result in improvement. And this should be done systematically through the coordinated efforts of department managers, technical supervisors, and group leads. Step 10, develop operational definitions for process quality characteristics. Plant operations leadership found that the two problems could be solved using the list of mitigating actions below. Number 1, develop a form for compliance evidence that states the measures needed to satisfy compliance requirements. Number 2, standardize energy facility equipment to ensure that procedures and processes at one facility may be repeated at another facility to produce similar results. And number 3, list the steps necessary to provide electronic records of manual reports. Step 11, achieve stability and capability in process quality characteristics. After the mitigating tasks have been implemented, the processes must be improved to remove variances in quality. This can be done through testing the suggested process improvements in a controlled environment, and also through controlled charts, so you can see the improvements over time. Now, review past records to note whether or not quality characteristics are stable. Also, histograms are a good tool to use when assessing capability. Step 12, identify requirements for process inputs. Now, organizations use material, people, information, and machines. NERC compliance needs the electric reliability regulations, that is the standards, plant operations personnel, the energy management system, which tracks the megawatt output and voltage regulation, the corporate policies and procedures, or also known as the PTPs and PLPs, the plant level procedures, that are known as PLPs, and the operations handbook, that is the document at the fingertips of the operator controlling generators for OPC. Step 13, communicate requirements to suppliers. OPC NERC Compliance Department is the corporate liaison for NERC compliance activities and is responsible for providing interpretations and clarifications to plant operations for any FERC-approved standards, and also responsible for developing the corporate policies, associates training, and the internal compliance program document that provide guidelines to NERC compliance efforts at Oglethorpe Power Corporation. Since FERC, NERC, and CERC are regulatory enforcement organizations and plant operations personnel are primarily tasked with making sure that the generating facilities are operational, the OPC NCD is seen as a supplier to the regulators, but also as a customer to the plant operations personnel. Step 14, develop operational definitions for input quality characteristics. By communicating the requirements to plant operations personnel and then providing compliance evidence to the regulator when requested, a good relationship is established between plant operations personnel, OPC NCD, and the regulators. Step 15, the last step. Ask your suppliers to do steps 4 to 14 and go back to step 1. This is how we strive for continuous improvement as our supplier does the same thing. That is, as our supplier strives for continuous improvement. Thank you. Systems approach to process improvement project model for NERC Electric Reliability Compliance Program by Bernard Johnson and IE